It happened in front of everyone. My own grandson, a police officer in uniform, looked me in the eyes and snapped the handcuffs on my wrists. I heard the cold click of the metal and felt the weight of humiliation burn inside my chest. I wanted to scream, to fight back, to ask him how he could do this to me, but all I heard was his whisper, sharp and cruel. "You're just an old man." In that moment I realized my whole life, all the sacrifices I had made, meant nothing to him. Neighbors stared, family members stood frozen, and the shame swallowed me whole. But what no one knew that night was that this scene was only the beginning. Because what my grandson discovered later would turn everything upside down, and none of us would ever live the same way again. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and let's dive into this story together. I've lived a long life, and I thought I had already seen everything. Wars, poverty, hunger, funerals of friends and loved ones, the struggles of raising children alone after losing my wife too young. But I had never felt the kind of pain that comes when your own blood looks at you like a stranger. Worse than a stranger, like an enemy. I raised that boy. I worked double shifts to pay for his school. I sold the little gold ring I had left from my wife so he could buy books. I carried him on my shoulders when he was little, proud as any grandfather could be. And yet, years later, he looked at me with contempt, as if I were trash on the street. My name is Henry. I'm 76 years old, and this is the story of how I went from respected elder to handcuffed criminal in the eyes of my own grandson, and how that night, the night he dragged me out of my own house, lit the fuse that would make all the secrets of my family explode. It was late, close to 11 o'clock, when I heard the banging on the door. Not just a knock, but the kind of pounding that makes the walls tremble. At first, I thought it was some drunk neighbor making a scene, because that happens around here. But then I heard the shout, "Police! Open up!" My heart jumped, and I stood there in the hallway trying to understand. Police? My house? What for? I had nothing to hide. I walked to the door slowly, the floor creaking under my slippers, and when I opened it, I froze. There were 3 patrol cars outside, red and blue lights flashing across the street, and half the neighbors already peeking through the curtains. And right there, in front of me, standing tall with his badge shining on his chest, was David, my grandson. He didn't greet me, didn't even smile. His voice was cold when he said, "We have a warrant to search this house." My knees shook. "David, what is this? What are you talking about?" But he didn't answer me. He just turned to the officers behind him and ordered, "Go in, search everything." And in they came, boots stomping, flashlights cutting through the dark, throwing cushions, opening drawers, lifting carpets, as if they were looking for buried treasure. My house, the house I had built brick by brick with my own hands, was being turned upside down like a crime scene. The neighbors gathered outside, whispering, pointing. I could feel their eyes stabbing me. And that's when I tried to hold David's arm, tried to remind him of who I was, and he shoved me away. "Don't interfere. You're just an old man." Just an old man. That sentence stuck in my chest like a knife. I don't know if it was anger, sadness, or shame, but in that moment, I wanted to disappear. My daughter Ellen came running, her voice trembling, asking what was happening. David ignored her. Marianne, his wife, stood by the gate with her hands shaking, not daring to meet my eyes. That silence of hers, even back then, it told me she knew something. The officers searched every corner, and the more they dug, the more I realized this wasn't some mistake. Someone had pointed them to me. Someone wanted me destroyed. I didn't know who, not yet, but I could already feel the weight of betrayal pressing on me. In the middle of the mess, one officer yelled from the back, "Nothing here!" Another shook his head after checking the garage. And then, when it seemed like it was about to end, David looked at me, pulled his handcuffs from his belt, and snapped them on my wrists in front of everyone. "Procedure," he said. But I knew it wasn't about procedure. It was about humiliation. He wanted to show me my place. They dragged me outside, neighbors whispering, some laughing, others shaking their heads. I saw Frank, my old neighbor, smirking with satisfaction, arms crossed, like he had been waiting for this day his whole life. That man had always envied me, always throwing poison in small comments, always trying to ruin me. Seeing him smile that night, I felt in my gut he had something to do with it. At the station, they questioned me for hours, asked about money, about accounts I never had, about things I didn't even understand. I kept saying the same thing. I'm innocent. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a retired man who lives on his pension. But the more I denied, the more David's eyes burned into me, as if he wanted me to confess something I hadn't done. Finally, they let me go. No evidence, no charges, just humiliation. When I got home, the place was upside down, the neighbors still watching, Ellen crying, and David nowhere to be seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the light off, staring at the mess, hearing the echo of his voice again and again. You're just an old man. I thought about everything I had done for him, for my daughter, for this family. I thought about my wife. If she could see this from above, would she blame me? Would she say I failed as a father, as a grandfather? I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, and I made a decision. If someone wanted to bury me, I wouldn't stay quiet. I would find out who was behind this, and I would drag the truth out into the open, even if it killed me. The days that followed only made things worse. People crossed the street to avoid me. The baker, who had greeted me every morning for 20 years, suddenly turned his back. Kids whispered when I passed by, calling me thief, calling me dirty. My own daughter started avoiding eye contact. The only one who seemed to feel my pain was Marianne. I caught her once, standing by my gate, eyes swollen from crying, lips trembling like she wanted to say something but couldn't. She turned and walked away before I could call her. That silence of hers was heavier than any insult. One evening, as I was picking up the broken things they had left behind, I found something I hadn't seen before. Under a loose floorboard in the shed, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a pile of money, stacks of bills, enough to buy a house. My hands shook so much I almost dropped it. I knew right there I was being framed. Someone had planted that money to make me look guilty. But who had the key to my shed? Who knew my routines? The answer could only be someone close. Very close. I hid the money again, this time in a place only I knew, and I sat down with my head spinning. If I went to the police, they'd never believe me. They'd say, "Look, the old man confessed." If I kept quiet, sooner or later, someone would come back for it. I was trapped. And in the middle of all that confusion, one thought kept eating me alive. Why did David hate me so much? Why would he throw me under the bus like that? Blood of my blood, my own grandson. That night, when I closed my eyes, I heard the door slam. I saw the flashing lights. I felt the metal biting my wrists, and I knew my life would never be the same. I also knew one thing for sure. The truth was out there, hidden under all the lies, and sooner or later, it would explode in our faces. And that's when the phone rang. A trembling voice on the other end whispered words that froze my blood. "You don't know the half of it. David isn't who you think he is. Be careful. They'll kill you too." I barely slept that night. I kept turning in bed, hearing the echo of my grandson's voice in my head, the clink of those handcuffs, the neighbor's whispers, the cold look in his eyes, as if I had become nothing more than a suspect to him. I told myself it was just a nightmare, but when the sun rose and I walked through the wreckage of my house, broken drawers, overturned chairs, everything scattered across the floor, I knew it was real. The police had invaded my home like I was some gangster, and David, my own blood, had been the one giving the orders. I felt like my chest had been hollowed out. The first days after the arrest were unbearable. People I had known my whole life began to look at me differently. The baker, who had always greeted me with a smile, barely nodded when I bought bread. The children on the street, who used to wave at me, now laughed behind my back and whispered, "Thief." Even the priest at church shook my hand with hesitation, his eyes full of doubt. That's how humiliation works. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It keeps bleeding afterward, little by little, as the respect you spent a lifetime building crumbles like dry wood. Inside the family, things were no better. My daughter Ellen wouldn't look me in the eye. She said little, avoided me at meals, and when she did speak, her tone was sharp, as if I had dragged her into shame. "You should have told us if there was something to hide, Dad," she snapped once, and that cut me deeper than anything. She truly believed I might be guilty. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake her, scream that I was innocent, but the words got stuck in my throat. When mistrust comes from your own child, it feels like a death. The only one who seemed unsettled, maybe even sympathetic, was Marianne, David's wife. She came to see me one afternoon while Ellen was out. She didn't say much, just brought a pie and placed it on the table with trembling hands. She tried to smile, but her lips wouldn't obey. I watched her eyes, red, swollen, like she had been crying for days. I asked her if she believed I was guilty. She froze, then whispered, "It's not about you." I asked what she meant, but she quickly stood up, mumbled something about having to leave, and ran out the door. That silence was heavier than a confession. A few days later, something happened that nearly made my heart stop. I went into the shed to put away some tools, trying to distract myself, when I noticed a loose board on the floor. I had never seen it like that. Curious, I lifted it, and there it was, a plastic bag stuffed with cash. Bundles of bills, tied tight, hidden under my own shed. My hands shook, my vision blurred, and my knees nearly gave out. I stared at that money, and I knew this was a setup. Someone had planted it to make me look guilty. But who had access to my shed? The door had always been locked. Only family knew where I kept the key. Could it have been Ellen? No, she wouldn't have had the courage. Could it have been Frank, my old rival, who had always hated me? He lived next door. He could have slipped in. But then again, the way Marianne looked at me, the way she trembled, maybe she knew something about this money. My chest tightened with suspicion, but I also felt fear. If I told the police about it, they'd say it was mine. If I kept quiet, sooner or later, someone would come back for it. I was trapped in a cage. That same night, I decided to follow David. He had been cold and distant since the arrest, barely speaking to me, barely even acknowledging my existence. I waited until he left the house in uniform, pretending it was just another night shift, but I knew better. I followed him at a distance, walking through alleys, keeping to the shadows like a thief in my own neighborhood. My heart pounded, but I had to know. I had to see what he was hiding. I saw him meet a man near the abandoned warehouse by the river. It wasn't just any man, it was another officer in uniform. They argued heatedly, voices raised, hands waving in the air. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough to feel the ground sink beneath my feet. "You think I'm taking the fall for you?" David shouted. "If this comes out, we're both finished." The other man leaned close, hissed something I couldn't hear, and shoved him hard against the wall. My grandson, the boy I raised, the pride of the family, shoved like a criminal in the night. And the way David looked afterward, desperate, sweating, glancing around like a cornered animal, I realized he was hiding something much bigger than family arguments. I hurried back home before he could see me, my mind spinning. My grandson, the one who put handcuffs on me, was knee-deep in something rotten. I wanted to believe it was all a mistake, that maybe he was investigating someone, undercover, anything. But deep down, I knew. That wasn't the face of an investigator. That was the face of a man trapped in lies. Later, I gathered the courage to confront Marianne. I waited until David left again, and I caught her outside the house. I asked directly, without hesitation, "Marianne, what do you know about this? Why did David come after me? Why is there money hidden in my shed?" Her face went pale, her lips trembled, and tears filled her eyes. She grabbed my arm and whispered, "You don't know what David has done. You don't understand the danger you're in. If you keep digging, they'll kill you too." I pressed her, but she pulled away, crying, and begged me not to ask any more questions. She said she couldn't say anything else, that if David found out she had spoken, it would be over for both of us. Then she ran inside, leaving me standing alone in the street, trembling like a man half my age. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with humiliation anymore. This wasn't just about my grandson hating me, or my neighbors thinking I was a criminal. This was something darker, something dangerous, something that could destroy us all, and I was right in the middle of it. But the worst was still to come. That same week, Ellen finally exploded at me during dinner. She slammed her fork on the table and shouted, "Why can't you just admit it, Dad? You've always hidden things from us. You're not the saint you pretend to be." I stared at her, shocked. I asked her what she meant, but she wouldn't explain. She just kept repeating that she was tired of lies, tired of carrying shame, tired of me acting like the victim. And for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Guilt, not anger, not sadness, but guilt. It hit me like a punch to the gut. What was my daughter hiding from me? Why did she look at me as if I were responsible for sins I didn't even know existed. The walls were closing in. My neighbors despised me. My daughter distrusted me. My grandson was tangled in corruption, and my granddaughter-in-law was terrified. And in my own shed, under my own floor, sat a bag of dirty money waiting to destroy me the moment someone decided it was time. I thought the humiliation of being handcuffed was the worst thing that could happen to me, but that was only the beginning. The truth was coming for us, and it would rip apart everything we thought we knew. And it started with one simple, terrifying question. What secret had my own daughter been hiding all these years? When my daughter screamed at me during dinner, and I saw guilt in her eyes instead of anger, I knew that the truth was about to surface. I had been dragged through humiliation, handcuffed in front of neighbors, accused of crimes I had never committed, and abandoned by the same grandson I had raised as a son. But nothing compared to the pain of realizing that Ellen, my own daughter, had been carrying a secret all these years, and that secret was at the center of the storm, tearing our family apart. From that night on, the house became a battlefield. Every word was loaded with suspicion, every silence filled with fear. I felt the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest, but at the same time I knew I could not stop, because once a man tastes humiliation like the one I lived through, he either sinks in shame or fights until the last breath, and I was not ready to sink. I began to put the pieces together in my head: the planted money, the fight between David and that other officer, Marianne's trembling words, and now Ellen's breakdown. It was like a puzzle where every piece was soaked in blood and tears. I decided to confront Ellen directly, even if it hurt more than I could bear. Late one night, after David had left for one of his supposed shifts, I sat her down at the table and looked her in the eyes with all the strength a father can summon. I told her I needed the truth, all of it, because I couldn't live another day in the dark. At first, she resisted, shook her head, cried, but little by little the dam broke. She confessed that many years ago, when David was preparing for college, she had taken money from people she should never have approached. She borrowed from men linked to crime, people who lent only in exchange for favors later. She said she did it because she was tired of living poor, tired of seeing me wear myself out working, while others in the neighborhood grew rich fast. She wanted her son to have the life she never had, and she justified it by telling herself she was doing it for the family. But the debt never disappeared. Those men wanted something back, and David grew up knowing the money that paid for his studies wasn't clean. He convinced himself it came from me, that I was the one involved with dirty money. That's why he had always looked at me with contempt, why he never respected me the way I thought he did. My own daughter's mistake, hidden out of shame, had poisoned the heart of my grandson, until one day he had me in handcuffs, convinced I was the criminal who had ruined his life. The words hit me like blows. I wanted to scream, to slam the table, to tell her she had destroyed everything. But when I looked at her, broken, confessing through tears, I saw not a villain, but a woman who had carried guilt for decades, a woman who had sacrificed her father's honor to buy her son's future. That night, I realized that every one of us was trapped in the same web, built by silence, shame, and fear. But even knowing this, one question remained. If David knew the truth came from his mother, why was he still hiding money, making deals, and working with corrupt officers? The answer came a few days later, and it came in blood. It was Frank, the neighbor who had always hated me, who finally gave me the missing piece. He came to my gate with a smirk, acting like a man who knew more than he should. He hinted at things, mocked me, said the apple never falls far from the tree, and let slip that David was not just involved, he was neck-deep in corruption. He was laundering money for crooked cops, covering up raids, and making deals with the same people his mother once borrowed from. And worse, he had been using me as a shield, planting suspicion in my direction to keep the heat away from himself. That was why he had insisted on the raid in my house. That was why he had humiliated me. My own grandson had framed me to save himself. I couldn't believe it, but deep down, I knew it was true. I decided I could no longer stay quiet. That night, I waited for him to return home, and when he stepped through the door, I confronted him. My voice trembled, but I held my ground. I told him I knew about the money, about the fights, about the deals with the other officer, and that I knew he had used me as a scapegoat. For the first time, the mask cracked. His face twisted with rage, his eyes full of hate. He shouted that everything he had done was because of me, that he had grown up in my shadow, that all his life people compared him to me, the hard-working, honest man, while he had to carry the secret of his mother's shame. He said he had no choice but to play dirty, to climb the ranks faster, to show the world he was stronger. The argument escalated, voices shaking the walls, until Ellen came running, tears streaming down her face, begging us to stop. That was when the final bomb exploded. She admitted to David that it was her fault, not mine, that I had been innocent all along. She begged him to forgive me, to forgive her, to stop lying. But instead of calming him, her words drove him into despair. He grabbed me by the shirt, shoved me against the wall, and for a moment I thought he would kill me with his bare hand. Marianne screamed, tried to pull him back, but he roared that everything was ruined, that it was too late for forgiveness, that the people he worked for would never let us live in peace if the truth came out. And then, like lightning splitting the night, the sound of sirens filled the street. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The police stormed in, not looking for me this time, but for him. Someone had spoken. Maybe Frank, maybe Marianne, maybe even Ellen. I'll never know. But in that moment, David was surrounded. Guns pointed. Orders shouted. He froze, still holding me by the shirt, his face pale with disbelief. And then, with the same hands that had once cuffed me, he was cuffed in front of us all. Before they dragged him away, he leaned close and whispered in my ear the same words as that night. "You're just an old man." But his voice cracked, trembling, no longer full of pride, but full of fear. And I looked at him, my grandson, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, and I realized he wasn't just my betrayer. He was also a victim of his mother's mistake, of his own pride, of a system that had chewed him up and spat him out. When the house emptied and silence returned, I sat down alone, exhausted, broken, but alive. The neighbors would talk, the shame would linger, and my family would never be the same. But the truth had come out. Masks had fallen, the villain had paid, and I, the old man, scarred and humiliated, had survived. Maybe David was right. Maybe I was just an old man. But I was the old man who lived long enough to see justice, even if it came wrapped in tragedy. And that, no matter what, no one could take from me. If you've listened this far, tell me in the comments what the word mask means to you. Because in my life, masks were what destroyed my family. And if you like this story, press the screen and watch the next one. It's even more intense, I promise.